Susan Lindauer, ex-CIA asset, author of Extreme Prejudice, The Terrifying Story of the Patriot Act and the Cover-Ups of Iraq, of 9/11 and Iraq, talking to us from the U.S. state of Maryland. Welcome to Min al-Dakhil from the Inside, Susan.
Welcome. Thank you so much for contacting me, Zainab. I have tremendous respect for Al Mayadeen.
Thank you. Pure pleasure to have you, Susan. Well, as the chief CIA asset covering Iraq and Libya at the UN from 1995 to 2003, you gave, Susan, advance warning about 9/11 attacks. What did you know back then? The specific details, how did you get this pre-September 11 intelligence, and what precautionary measures have you counseled?
I learned about 9/11 in April and May of 2001, 6 months before the attack occurred. I learned of it from my CIA handler, who demanded in April.
Richard Fuse.
Dr. Richard Fuse, who has ties to Lebanon and Syria. And he demanded that I must contact my sources at the United Nations in the Iraqi embassy at the United Nations, and that I must warn them that the United States was demanding to hear all possible intelligence on an airplane attack with a known target of the World Trade Center. And that we were threatening in April of 2001, we were threatening war on Iraq if Iraq did not provide intelligence on this attack involving airplane hijackings with a possible mini nuclear thermo device that was, and the airplane, it was very clear that we expected airplanes to strike, to launch an aerial attack on the World Trade Center. And that's exactly how it was presented to me by the CIA in April of 2001. And I went to, and the Iraqis.
This was, Susan, just a hypothetical scenario. I mean, when did your concern jump from hypothetical scenario to the belief that an attack was actively being planned and imminent? Who did you warn about this attack, and what happened afterwards?
This is very important because in April, when I heard about this the first time, my CIA handler told me to threaten the Iraqis. I went to the Iraqi embassy and I said, hey, the Iraqis had always been very kind and very helpful on anti-terrorism. Saddam was very afraid of Islamic radicals in his own country and Islamic fundamentalism in his own country. That is true. And so that is true. And so he was always very helpful on anti-terrorism. So when I went to the Iraqi embassy in April of 2001, I said, hey, would you please send this message and ask Saddam's government to check and see if you know anything and get back to me. And they said, yes, of course we will do this. Not a problem. So I went back to Washington and my CIA handler called me and said, come down to my office. I want to hear what the Iraqis told you. And I said, well, they were very nice. They promised to send a cable to Baghdad. And he said, I did not tell you to be nice to these people. I want you to go back and tell the Iraqis, and he used very strong language that I cannot repeat on Al Mayadeen. The strongest, most ugly language.
Abhorrent words.
Language.
Yes.
You cannot use this language on television.
Foul words,
You cannot.
It
is foul. Okay, but he said, I demand that you tell them they better give us this intelligence. And he said this very important thing. This threat, quote, this threat originates at the highest level of government, above the CIA director and above the Secretary of State.
So the president.
That there's only 3 people.
The defense.
President George Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. So he said, make sure that you tell them this threat now this is now May of 2001. And they are, and he's saying
Susan,
that
Susan, why Iraq?
Oil. It's always about what they can steal. It is horrible. It is selfish. It is evil beyond comprehension. But it is what they can take. They wanted Iraq's oil.
And this is also voiced out by current. This was also voiced out by current President Donald Trump. He said, "We are after the oil."
It's always about stealing the oil. In Syria, Donald Trump has pulled out of the whole country, except the part of Syria that has the oil wealth. And Joe Biden, and for those of you who think that Joe Biden would be better, let me remind you, Joe Biden started 5 wars in 7 years. Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Ukraine. 5 wars in 7 years. And it was Joe Biden's idea, Joe Biden's policy to partition all of these all of these governments were peaceful, prosperous, and stable, except Iraq. And Iraq was only destabilized because of the United Nations sanctions, which I must correct all of you. The sanctions killed 2 million human beings. I don't care what your nationality is. These are human beings. The sanctions killed 1 million children under the age of 5. The United Nations did not allow Iraq to count 6-year-olds or 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds in the sanctions deaths.
Right. Allow me to ask you here, Susan, okay, you gave an advance warning about the 9/11 attacks. Why, in your opinion, no one cared to take action to thwart it?
There is more. In August, okay, so I learned of 9/11 in April and May from the CIA. Throughout the summer, I repeatedly went back to the Iraqis and said, have you heard anything? This is very serious. I was also involved in the negotiations for the weapons inspectors with Iraq's ambassador. So we were trying to get a solution to the whole problem. That the Iraqis would have the weapons inspectors. Iraq was trying to cooperate with anti-terrorism before 9/11. So in May of 2001, before 9/11, when I went back and I had to threaten the ambassador, I said, look, this is very serious. He said, Baghdad has already agreed to allow the FBI to send a terrorism task force into Baghdad. Because we want to help you find whoever's doing this terrorist attack. This was Iraq in May of 2001. Now, throughout the summer, Iraq kept saying, Susanna, all of the intelligence on Iraq is coming from the United States. It's coming from the CIA. So we're looking around to see what it is, and everything comes back to you. You are the source of the intelligence on terrorism on 9/11. It's coming from you. And I was like, what am I gonna? What do I? So I go back to on the day of on August 2nd. This is very specific, and I must tell the story. On August 2nd, 2001. 6 weeks before 9/11 was the date of Robert Mueller's Senate confirmation to the FBI director, to head the FBI. And I had a conversation with my CIA handler, and I said, and he says to me, gosh, Susan, do you think that, what happens if this attack on the World Trade Center occurs before the Senate votes on Robert Mueller's confirmation to head the FBI? What's going to happen if there's no FBI director when this attack occurs? That's how certain they were.
Yes, allow me to stop you here, Susan. We have to go for a short break, and then afterwards we'll come to talk about how you were indicted on the Patriot Act. But after the break, إذا فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا. أهلا بكم من جديد. Susan Lindauer, ex-CIA asset and author of Extreme Prejudice. Welcome back to من الداخل from the inside, ma'am. Well, you gave the advance warning, Susan. Nobody did anything. And then 9/11 took place. Why did you end up being indicted under the Patriot Act, Susan? And why did the corporate media refuse to cover your story, Susan?
The reason that no one has heard my story, the reason that my story was suppressed, was I requested to testify before Congress, before a blue ribbon presidential commission on Iraqi pre-war intelligence and 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And I had firsthand knowledge of all of what really happened. And the government did not want anyone ever to hear these stories. So 30 days after I requested to testify before Congress, I woke up one morning to hear the FBI pounding on my door with a warrant for my arrest. And I became the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act. Throughout the, right until, for 5 years, I was held under indictment. I was locked up in prison with no trial or hearing or guilty plea, not even a hearing. I was locked up in prison on a Texas military base. I was declared not competent to stand trial because I said that they said I was so convinced of my innocence that I could not conceive that I might be convicted. And I said, but how can you convict me?
Right.
I haven't done anything wrong. And I deny it. Whatever you have, I deny it. I demand my right to a trial. I'm not backing down.
Right. And actually you were exonerated, Susan, later on. Okay? Yes. You worked as a CIA asset and you were incarcerated. You were on the verge of being forcibly drugged. You were indicted under the Patriot Act. You were later exonerated.
They were so scared of me. They were so scared of me, Zainab, that they locked me in prison with no hearing. Yes. I demanded a hearing.
And no witnesses and nothing. Yes.
And then they said that they were so frightened of me, they wanted me to be forcibly drugged.
Sure.
With Haldol, Ativan, and Prozac.
Right.
So I would have been chemically lobotomized.
Right.
That's how scared they were of this truth coming out. The charges were dropped 5 days before Barack Obama's inauguration. Because the new president, Obama, was like, I don't want anything to do
and actually
I don't want to touch this.
The same judge, Mukasey, who set you free, he resigned, or he retired actually on the same day you were out. So
I was his last decision. The last decision that he made was that he would let me go with no drugging at all. He had held me in prison for 1 year. So 1 year in prison, to be honest with you, is not a bad thing. Do not ever break the law. Nobody wants to go to prison. But if you're going to go to prison, 1 year is not a bad sentence.
Right.
In America. In America, they were trying to throw me in prison for 30 years. They wanted to detain me for up to 10 years with no hearing.
All this, Susan, for daring to tell the truth. It cost you your job, your freedom, and almost your sanity. What lessons have you learned, Susan?
Oh, well, I will tell you that the tragedy And here I must say that I must stop and say the tragedy of Beirut is 30 times, 40 times greater than 9/11. 9/11 was a psychological trauma for the United States, but it was a Pearl Harbor event, so that to create an excuse for the United States to go to war in Iraq, and that's exactly what it was. It was deliberately done, and the trauma to the United States psyche was very powerful, but it is nothing comparable to what Beirut is suffering right now. I have tremendous respect for the people of Beirut, that you have 300,000 families that are homeless now in Beirut versus 9/11, which is 2 buildings. Okay, so the United States, the self-importance of the United States, the grandiosity, the Bush administration was not capable of recognizing or admitting that the war in Iraq was a disastrous mistake.
Yes.
Was a catastrophic mistake that was the beginning of the end of the United States.
So what are the lessons, in 30 seconds, what are the lessons that you have learned, Susan, from all this, the incidents that took place with you?
I was right. The courage that it took to fight through all of this trauma for 5 years of my life was worth it. I am glad that I stood up and said that the sanctions were evil and killed children who did not deserve to die. I am glad it was, my sacrifice is nothing at all, is small compared to the suffering of the Iraqi people. And also, I would be careful for all of you. If Joe Biden is elected, Joe Biden started 5 wars in 7 years. Joe Biden is the author of the wars in Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Ukraine. And the tragedy is, if Joe Biden is reelected as president, then we will see the United States deploy hundreds of thousands of soldiers into Syria and Libya, particularly, and Yemen.
Here, allow me, Susan, to ask you, how do you read the current economic, health, and political developments in the USA today under President Trump, and what are your prospects of the forthcoming US presidential elections?
Well, I think that the New York Times is right. This is a knife fight in the United States right now. But I think, honestly, Trump has a very strong chance of re-election. And I think that it would, I know all of the Arabs, I know you hate Donald Trump, you don't like him because of Iran. I get that. But Joe Biden is 1,000 times worse. If Joe Biden wins, all of these wars will restart again. Because the economy in the United States is very fragile. And Joe Biden wants higher taxes. He wants more control over the people. And to do that, and also the military does not really like Donald Trump, because Donald Trump refused to deploy soldiers into Syria and Libya. And Donald Trump wants to withdraw soldiers from NATO, 12,000 soldiers from NATO. So if Trump wins, we're going to have peace. But if Joe Biden wins, we're going to see all of these wars that have been, low-grade conflicts right now. All of them are going to explode again. And the military will make Joe Biden give him their wars. They want their wars again. That's the key. The military-industrial complex will use any excuse to test its weapons, to play their war games. That's what this is about.
My last question to you, Susan, please, and briefly, if I may ask, to what extent did the flawed U.S. foreign policy contribute to the causes that led to the September 11th attacks?
The United States manufactured the attack. I'm convinced that this was a U.S. planned attack. This is very unpopular to say, but all of the intelligence on 9/11 originated from the United States. It did not come from the Arab world. It came from us. And you can't get around that. There's no way around this. We created the problem so that we could have a justification for war.
Right. Susan Lindauer, ex-CIA asset and author of Extreme Prejudice, thank you very much for sharing this valuable insider information, and also for whoever would like to have a more insider look into the details of the pre-9/11 and post-9/11 geopolitical landscape, I advise you to read Susan Lindauer's Extreme Prejudice. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. والشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.